So we're going to start today. We got to open up our Rhino file that I sent to you guys. You're going to be able to import your lines into this Rhino file that's set up in with using RhinoCAM as a plugin to Rhino. This software is only available in 194. The first 6 computers in the first row, you guys can set up your files. This is the only way you're going to get your 3D engraving to work on the machines that we have here. The nice thing about RhinoCAM is as you start to use this program that there's a lot more options for the tool paths. These lines that we have here are very simple, but there's a whole bunch of operations that we're not even going to get into yet, but you can play around with these later on when you guys have some free time, and if you have questions, just let me know and I can try to walk you through what they might do. But before we can get started, you can see I have my lines right here. This file has already been pre-set up to be in the right spot for our machine, because you guys are going to be doing the flip over of your objects, so you have to make sure that 0 point is directly in the middle of all your lines on your object and on the top face of our curves. So you can see here that it's all set up correctly, but your lines might look completely different than this. So I'm going to walk through how we're going to get these lines into the right spot, and then how we can set up our ShopBot file so that we can submit this right to the ShopBot and make sure everything works. If you don't follow these instructions exactly, your part won't work in our ShopBot downstairs. You won't be able to turn on the spindle. Your 0 point won't work at all, and then we're going to request that you guys come back up to 194 and then write your codes following the procedures that I'm going to be showing you here shortly. So here's our job. Originally I had this located over here on the side, so I'm just going to move it out of the way here so you can just show you what that's like. So who knows, wherever your job might come in, if you import it, we'd like you to import right into this file. You could delete these objects and then you have your lines, they're ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this box. The box below is our material that we're going to cut, and then the lines above are the tool paths that we want to follow. So what we have to do is we got to make sure that we get this located in the right spot in our coordinate system. So here's our coordinates all over the place, X, Y, Z. This is the origin, so that's our 0 point, which I talked to you guys last week about our origin point on the CNC machine, and how everything is derived off of this origin point. So we need to tell the computer now that these parts need to be located at the origin. So how we do that in RhinoCAM, the first thing we have to do before we get started telling it to that coordinate is tell the machine what we want to mill. So you can only have the parts that you want to be milled visible in this. So you have to hide all your other parts in space, and you'll know right away if you have a part that's not if it's missing or not hidden in your model. So we go through right now, and I'm going to pick the stock, and I'm going to pick stock from selection, and you'll see that my orange box, which is our material that we're going to cut, moved from the origin over to my stock. So now I know that is correct. If you had another line off in space, you'll see that this orange box is not just over those lines. So if that's the case, make sure you go through and hide those objects. Sometimes there's mystery lines that are floating around in your object. So I have this all ready to go now, and then I'm going to go to this Align tab right here, and I'm going to drop down Align the Stock. You have to do this every single time you use this software, because this is now telling where we want our cuts to happen inside of this orange box. So these would be our cut lines, let's just say, and then our orange box is our material. So if you had your orange box and it was bigger than your material, then you'd have to make some adjustments. But for us, we know that we have enough foam for what we're cutting, and then our lines fit within that side of that box. Well, we have to make sure we align it correctly, so we're going to always align to the top of the Z for our project here, and then we're going to align to the center. Normally when I cut everything to the southwest corner. That means everything will be in this zone right here in positive space. X, Y, Z is in positive space. Or X and Y are in positive space, and then we always mill negatively. So this one we're going to mill with the origin point being in the middle, however. So I'm going to do that. Everything's still selected over here. Then I say OK. And then it adjusts my stock accordingly. And then you have to go back in here again, and you have to set up your world coordinate system. So how that is those world coordinates that we're going to set up with the CNC machine with X, Y, and Z when we manually zero it to our location. That's what we're setting up right now. So then we have to say we want to set this from either the stock box or the part box, and each of them, because we set up the stock box the exact same way as our part box, these are interchangeable. So it doesn't really matter which one we're going to use. So I am going to pick our stock or our part box, so you can see here it's ready to go, and then I'm going to say we want to zero the Z height to the highest face, so that's the top of our stock, and then we want the zero position to be right in the center. And if you can see now, our origin point, after I click that, goes right to the middle of the screen. So now when I hit OK, all your lines that you have selected here should jump to the origin if we did everything correctly. So I hit OK, everything moved to the origin. You can see my highest point, my Z, is in the right location. We're going to be milling negatively into the Z direction. We're going to be setting up all our coordinates in the right spot. So this is how your job should be set up before you get started. Everything should be milled in there. And we can adjust accordingly when you guys start milling other things that you're not going to do a flip over. Usually we zero to this lower left hand corner, which is the southwest corner on ShopBot. Now what we have to do, and this is really crucial, is I have a file saved for you guys that you'll get emailed to you and will be on D2L, but we have to set up the machine. So the nice thing about RhinoCAM is it has the power to output those text files that I showed you guys, the coordinate systems of connecting the 2 points in space. It has the ability to write that code for a number of different machines. So we're going to tell it what machine we have. So I just double click on here. This is our machine definitions. Don't change any of this. That's the limits of our machine. What you're going to do is you're going to go to the post right here. So what this is this is the post processor of our ShopBot. I have this file saved called ShopBot saved to our RP lab folder. So if this comes up as a default ShopBot when you guys are opening this up, then make sure you just hit these 3 dots right here. You go to the R drive, you click on RP lab, and you hit OK. This file is saved. It should pop in automatically to ShopBot. If you do not do that, then make sure you go through those steps. So that needs to be saved there. And then you have to double check down here. Don't change any of these things at all. Write down here that it is saving as a .sbp file. If it does not save to a .sbp file, all you have to do is click Add New, and then you're just going to type in .sbp. And that's a ShopBot output file. It's just a text file. It's just the file extension that our ShopBot 3 software uses. So just hit OK, then that's ready to go. If you want to get into this, you can start to look at these different outputs for our machine. But I have this already all set up, so the machine's going to run correctly for our objects that we're going to try to mill. So that's all set up there. So then we can say OK to that. We got our part now in the right location. We have our ShopBot post processor all set up. And I have already an engraving tool set up. And that's our code that we're going to use, our machine operation that we're going to use to mill your lines. And our lines that we're milling, the reason why we're using the engraving function is we are milling in foam so that it's like cutting air, and I'm going to be able to just trace this line right here in space for our operation. If I wasn't going to use the engraving function, it would just not mill this perfectly aligned with that. It would just try to mill flat like our other software did last week. So this is a little different. So how we get to this engraving function, so first we're going to set up, I want to mill all the blue lines. So I'm going to shut off my red lines, and I'm going to shut off my, get my tool paths 2 turned on, shut off my surface. So now I'm going to select my lines right there. I'm going to come over here to my 2D axes, and I'm going to pick engrave. So now you can see I have my lines all ready to go. They're all highlighted right here. It automatically, since I have them highlighted, takes those lines and puts them into this region right here. If there's no objects in this region, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to say select from the objects. You're going to highlight them, and then you just hit enter, and then we can get these objects into our model. So I did that, hit enter, now all our lines are in the right spot. And I'm going to do these two operations separately so that if I wanted to do a bit change, I can do that. Then the next thing we have to do is we have to load our tool that we're going to use. So you can see here right now that I have only one tool that I have selected. So what you guys have to do to make sure you see all the tools for our machine is you have to go in and you need to find the tools that are loaded in RhinoCAM. So how we do that is we go to the RhinoCAM tab up here on the top, click RhinoCAM, click Machine Objects Browser, and then what we have to do is this little button right here is load our tool library, and then we click English Tools, unless you have a metric bit, and we loaded 56 tools. So here's all the different tools. Now these are just all basically generic tools that the machine has. We can make our own, but for this is going to work well for us. Then we can go through and we can close that out. Go back in, and I'm going to make my engraving tools again. Now if I go into my tools, I'm going to see all my different options. So what I'm going to do with this one, just for the fun of it, you can select to all these different bits, but I'm going to pick this 1/2 inch or this 1/4 inch straight bit for my first pass. And you can see down here, it's very not great graphically, but this is a ball end. This is a ball end, and then this is your standard flat end mill. And then there's different ones that would be your V notch, then there's engraving bits, all different types of bits. So make sure you pick the right one. And we can edit these right here. So if we had our machine bit that we knew exactly that the bookstore sells, let's say we want to change this, let's just change it so we can see what happens. I'm going to change this to a 1/2 inch bit, 0.5. We don't really worry about, we're cutting foam, so we don't need to worry about the number of flutes. We don't have to worry about any of this. The shank diameter is a 1/2 inch. Our tool diameter right here is 1/2 inch. So that's good to go. Now you can see these things changing. You can pick from these different end bits that we have here. So it just depends on what you want to mill and what bits you've selected. And I'm going to save this as a new tool. So that's saved. I'm going to save this as new. Okay. So that's good. Save it out. Now I'm going to find that bit. Here it is, ready to go. Now my tool selected. Then the next thing we have to do is we have to go to our speeds and our feeds. So what this is how fast that machine operates, how it travels. The tricky part about this is our machine code, when we were writing it in the basement of the vCarve Pro, is we have a ShopBot does everything in inches per second. So all of these are in inches per minute. So we need to times these by 60 seconds in a minute. So that's what you have to do if you're outputting to foam. So our fastest speed that we were going to mill in our foam was 6 inches per second. So we need to change these then to 360 inches per minute. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to change these all to 360 inches per minute. So now I have that set. I'm also going to set my transfer rate to 360. Everything is there. I have my speeds all at 360. That's going to be your fastest, and this is just for foam. I can't specify that enough. If you do this in wood, if you do this in aluminum, if you do this in MDF, you will break your bit. You only are going to milling at these speeds with foam. Now I have those set up. Now I'm going to go over to set up my actual cutting of my lines. So I have my clearance plane. What that is when your file or your bit is going to move from one spot to another spot. So if it was going to travel along this line right here, and then it's going to move to another location, it's going to go up to our clearance plane in the Z height, move over a safe distance, come down that point, and then start moving. So you can set this to where you want it to be, but I always just have I usually always do the predetermined clearance plane. It just derives it off the lines that you have. But sometimes our Z height is limited, but if you want to cut thicker objects. So just make sure you make sure that that's all set up as our clearance plane, especially for this cutting that you guys are going to cut the foam. It's not a big deal there, but that has to be set up automatic in clearance plane. Then we're going to go to our cut parameters. Now this is where you're going to tell it how deep you want to go past this engraving point. So what we are going to do is we're going to tell it where we want to cut. So the only thing we're going to cut down here is we're going to change our depth of cut. So how we do that is you just type in the dimension that you want to go. So this one I'm going to say I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch deep with on these lines right here. And then because I clicked in the rough depth, because we're cutting foam, I can cut that 1/2 inch in one shot. If I'm cutting more than an inch at a time in one shot, I'm going to want to adjust this to cut no more than 1 inch at a time. So it'll do 2 passes. But this one we're just going to do at 1 pass. If we're cutting wood, aluminum, MDF, anything like that, we're going to have to select these differently according to our bit. But our bit's going to be able to handle this with the foam. Then our entry and exit, we don't have to do anything with that. Then our sorting, you're going to want to click this minimum direction sort. What that's going to do is save you a bunch of machine time, because it's going to start to zigzag back and forth here. It's not going to just follow your line and then move to another spot, traveling most of it in space above your foam. It's going to be zigzag back and forth to give us the fastest machine time. Then you got all that set up. Then I'm going to say generate, and you can see now I have my cuts, and it's going to go, the yellow lines are where it's going to cut plunge to, where it's going to go in the Z height. The blue line is where it's doing its cutting. The red line here is a retraction, and then it's going to move to the other side of our next line for our cutting. So you can see it's just going to move back and forth all here. And sometimes you have to play with this to get the best operation, but that's all we have to do there. So that's ready to go. Now I'm going to turn on my other toolpaths. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to shut off toolpaths 1 or 2, and I'm going to turn on toolpaths 1. So now you can see those in space. You still see our blue lines and our red lines from our cut, which is fine. How you can get rid of those is you just click on the toolpath visibility right here, and you can make those disappear. And then you can click on and off different operations on the bottom here if you want to change your visibility. But for us now, I am going to make a new engraving with, now I'm going to select my red lines that I have. So I'm going to select all those red lines, and I want to follow those paths across there. So I'm going to make another bit, machine operation. Those lines are all set up on the computer as I've selected them before I started my operation. So you can see those here, 29 lines. I'm going to make sure my tool is correct. It will always default to the previous version that you had from the first operation. So, but you could switch the bit if you wanted to. That's totally up to you. If you do switch the bit, we'll have to output into 2 different files, but that's okay. Our speeds and feeds are now going to have to be changed. That's not kept, so we're going to change those all again to 360. So we're going to do that. If you don't do this, the machine is going to run extremely slow. So make sure that you change these speeds. My tool is set up, my speeds and feeds, my clearance, and then this one, I just want it to follow the line exactly the way I have it. I don't want to cut deeper, but you could change this depth to whatever you want it to be. But this one, I just want it to actually trace these lines the way that they were generated in the computer. So I don't have to worry about my entry and exit, but I'm going to change to my minimal direction sort right there. And then I'm going to hit generate. So now all my lines have been created. You can see the blue line actually follows the exact line that was drawn. So I have those. I'm going to delete this engraving one that I did before. So I'm just going to delete that out. So I don't want to replicate anything that I did before. So now I have my lines of code for my first operation, and then I have my next ones. Now the nice thing about RhinoCAM, it has a nice simulation so we can see what this is going to look like. You can pick your whole object right here and set up one. You could select just the engraving code that you wanted to. You can right click on these, you can rename them whatever you want to, but for us right now we don't need to worry about that. Then you just click this simulate button up here, and then you can click play, and you'll be able to see the operations exactly the way they were created. So that's how you can create custom toolpaths. So you could go from this simulation, do a bunch of different operations, different codes that you wanted to do, and then see which one looks best. You could save this file if you want to. You can output it, render it, all that kind of stuff. But for us right now, we're just using it as a simulation to see if everything is going to work well for us. Then I have that all set up. Now I have to output this to a file that our ShopBot can read. This is just a visualization of what these two tool operations are showing us. So I'm just going to select, if I had 2 different bits, I would select these separately and then output them, but because we're using the exact same bit, I'm going to select setup 1 as our operation. I just right click on this and I'm going to click post. If you click post, it's going to post this, it's going to make an output file, and I'm going to save this out for you guys so you can see what that looks like. So I'm just going to name it somewhere that you can remember. So that's all ready to go. So I have my engraving shopbot file, saving that out, and then it's going to pop up what this tool does. And remember, I talked to you about, it's just literally points in space connected by a line. So that's all we're doing here. And then you're ready to go with this. You're going to bring this file, this shopbot file, down to us in the computer lab or in the CNC room, and then we are going to be able to just run this job as is. If you don't set up this exactly the way that I walked you through that, then you're going to have problems with your machine cuts. And you'll know right away if they're not set up correctly, if your Z coordinates aren't set up correctly. If we were going to output these with two different bits, I would say we're going to right click on our engraving one here, and I could say post, and then whenever I do that and I'm going to use a different bit, let's just say then I was going to save this, and this is going to be my 1/2 inch bit, so I would save my 1/2 inch bit, and then save that out. And then I could go to my next bit and I could save this one out separately, and maybe I want to do a 3/4 inch bit for that one. And because I just traced those lines, it doesn't really matter what bit I stick inside of here. You're going to get different tooling paths. It's going to look different. So just from one operation on our computer, and depending on the bit we select, we can get different finishes across our foam that we're going to be milling. I'm going to save that out. So now I have 2 of those codes, and then you're going to run them in the machine down in the CNC room. So you'd run the one that's the 1/2 inch bit first, and then, or the 3/4 inch, doesn't really matter, and then you're going to run the next one after that, and then you're ready to go. Always save your file when you're done, so you can come back up into 194 to run your ShopBot RhinoCAM files. You have to use RhinoCAM in 194. There is you could buy your own version of this, but then these files aren't set up for you. But it's no problem. Use it in 194, and then we can walk you through it in the basement. This RhinoCAM isn't in the basement at all. You have to do all RhinoCAM cuts in room 194. Thank you.